couple buttons here to get us going live. And waiting on the interwebs to work their magic, and they're now working their magic. All right. All right. So with that, we're now live. So my name is Chris Berry with Castle Wealth Group. It's great seeing everyone for the first time. Happy New Year. Nikhil writes in, Happy New Year to you as well. So I always like to start these. So these are our wisdom webinars. We do them every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And all I'm doing is really answering your legal, financial, and tax planning questions as a certified elder law attorney, which is gold standard as it relates to estate planning and elder law. I think there's 17 of us in the state of Michigan, maybe 500 across the whole nation, and also as a certified financial planner, which is a gold standard as it relates to financial planning, including tax planning. And there might be a handful of CELAs, dually certified CELAs and CFPs in the nation. And I'm friends with a couple of them. So it's a small club where we really kind of do a deep dive into this retirement legacy planning. So some of the things that we bring up in terms of our trust planning or concepts might be a little deeper than what you're used to going to just an average brokerage firm or average estate planning attorney. So with that, we do these webinars each week. They're really for you. They're just answering your questions a lot of times live and on the fly. Sometimes I might have a number that's wrong, or I'll have to follow up on a certain question here or there. But a majority of the time I can answer just right on the fly like that, because this is what we do 24/7. And it's really just a value add where we're answering your questions. And I always like to start with positive focus. We start our team meetings with this. Saw a recent quote or study that said that when you're operating from positivity, you're actually like 31% smarter than when you're operating from negativity. So we're big believers in positivity, not to sugarcoat things, because obviously there's a lot going on in the world, but we can't control the events. We can only control our responses. So I always like to start with that positive focus. And my positive focus a lot of times revolves around family. And so this week, both my kids' report cards came in, and just blessed to have really smart kids who work hard. My son, he did a solo for clarinet, and he was the only soloist really in his band as an 11-year-old. And it was I was so proud of him. My daughter, her report card, it's ridiculous. She has like one area to work on. And she was so down about that one little area. Everything else, like, they grade on a scale of 1s, 2s, and 3s. 3s being like doing great. 2, kind of making progress. 1 needs to improve. I remember when I was around their age, the only needs to improves I ever received were in handwriting and neatness. But none of my kids had needs to improves. The majority of it was 3s, and my son got mostly A's and B's. So just blessed to have great kids. Something turned out right there. So that's my positive focus. And I guess a professional positive focus would be that I am very excited to be back. We took 2 weeks off. One at the end of last year, and then last week because I was traveling for a work conference, which was just setting up kind of strategies for 2022. So it's good to be back in the saddle. And so what we do is I answer your questions. If something is unclear, feel free to put it in the chat or put it into the Q&A, and I'll watch that as we're going through this. But otherwise, I have a bunch of questions that were submitted ahead of time, and I will just get right into that. Let me click a couple buttons and share my screen. Hit that button, hit that button, hit that button, and then I hit this button over here, and I hit that button, and we are good to go. So keep in mind, this is general advice. You want to see how this applies to your situation, please just reply to the email or give our office a call, and we can assist you on your personal situation. A lot of times people ask me general questions, and the answer is it depends, which can be frustrating, but if we have a longer conversation, then I can better address it. All right. So our first question that was submitted is, should a trust be listed as a beneficiary of a 401k or IRA or a spouse? So this is, again, one of those kind of it depends questions, but typically I break almost all assets into these two categories. One is qualified, one is non-qualified. This is just kind of a general way to think of things. So qualified accounts are like 401ks, IRAs, Roths, 403Bs, 457s, and I'm sure there's more. Non-qualified is basically everything else. So qualified means there's some type of tax qualification to them, like 401k, it's in the tax code. 457, it's referring to the tax code. And it could either be tax deferred or gross tax free. Really, the way it works is any of these qualified accounts, typically when we're talking about beneficiaries, so who do you name as a beneficiary of these accounts? Typically, and this is just general information, we name the spouse first, and then we would name the trust, if we have a trust, as the contingent beneficiary. The reason for this is a lot of times the spouse can do what's called a spousal rollover, where now that account becomes that surviving spouse's account, and it really becomes their account. So if they don't owe any RMDs or anything like that, let's say you pass away, you're 75, your spouse is 67, you were taking out RMDs, now the spouse inherits that. Now they don't have to take out any required minimum distributions of those pre-tax accounts. So I'd say majority of the time we name spouse followed by trust as beneficiaries of qualified accounts. And so when we're putting together a trust and reviewing it and making sure the funding is handled properly and we're retitling those assets, I would say majority of the time we're naming spouse and then trust. Now, if you don't have a trust or if you don't have a spouse, so let's say you're single or widowed or divorced, then we would almost always name the trust as a beneficiary. And I would say that's how we handle it like 99.9% of the time. There are certain exceptions, but that is almost always the way that we handle it. Now, non-qualified accounts, really everything else, typically we would just name the trust as the beneficiary because the trust typically provides for the spouse first. And then if not the spouse, then the other beneficiaries are the kids. The big reason why here we're naming the spouse first is typically there's a tax benefit of doing so. So because they can do a spousal rollover. So who should be the beneficiary of my 401k or IRA, trust or spouse? Typically I'd recommend spouse first, and then if not the spouse, then the trust. So one down. And again, if you have questions on this, feel free to put it into the Q&A, and I'll go ahead, or the chat, I'll go ahead and address it. All right, moving on to the next one. So number 2. So I'm getting insurance through work. However, my wife and I are turning 65. Should we sign up for Medicare? So with Medicare, you have different Medicare. You have Medicare Part A, Part B, C, which is actually called Advantage, and then Medicare Part D. So D stands for drugs. Wish the other ones stood for something, but they don't. Part A, Part B is typically, this is like your prescriptions and, no, that's not right. Part A is the one that you pay premiums on. So Part A, there's no cost to it. So the big one is with regards to Part B. So should you start paying Part B premiums? Because if you don't at age 65, you could be penalized. For the rest of your life, you could pay a penalty on your Part B premiums. But here's the thing is there's an exception where if you are working and you have insurance through work, which in this case the individual does, then typically what I'd recommend is you still maintain that insurance through work. You don't need to pick up that Part B and Part D premium yet. You can pick up Part A if you want to. There's no downside or really upside typically. But long story short, you don't need to. If you're working and you have insurance through work, or your spouse is working and has insurance through work, you don't have to pick up Medicare Part B, and you don't have to worry about any penalties there. Okay. That's 2 down. And we'll keep going. All right, we have a Castle Trust. Yay. So that's an asset protection trust. And we moved money from the marketing into the safety. Oh, yep. So there should be market side of things, not marketing, into safety and growth vehicle last year as this taxable event. So here's the thing. So we have this money inside of an asset protection trust. Okay, we call it a Castle Trust. And when you set it up, you're typically going to be the trustee. So you're in charge of the assets inside of the trust. So you can have this money in the market. So in stocks and bonds, you can have this money invested in real estate. You can have it invested in things like fixed index annuities. You can have invested in index universal life insurance. You can have the money sitting in checking and savings. You can have businesses inside of the trust. And here's the thing, unlike money that's like in an IRA, whenever you pull money out of here, it's taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So you have to pay tax on anything you pull out of an IRA or 401k, and now you're taxed on it. But when you're moving money, like if you were to move money from the market to a fixed index annuity or to a IUL, or you move money to invest in real estate, or maybe you're selling a piece of real estate and now you want to invest in the market, you're in control of it. You don't have to pay income tax on that. Okay. That's just changing the nature of the assets. So it's really no different than going from Google stock to Apple stock. Okay. Maybe you have capital gains, maybe, but it's not an income taxable event. Yeah, likewise, if you have money sitting in checking and savings and you buy a house or something like that, there's no income tax due on any of those transactions. Plus, it's all things that you can do within the trust. So from a tax perspective, it's basically tax neutral. And that's the question a lot of people have is, like, if you set up one of these asset protection trusts, you're in control. And so you can do all of this inside of the trust. And really, there's no difference from a tax perspective if it was in your name, whether it was in the trust or not. And that's one of the reasons why people like this type of trust, is that you remain in control. And by moving the assets into the trust, you're protecting against 2 potential catastrophes. And these are only inside of asset protection trusts. One would be like creditors and lawsuits. So if you were to get in a car accident, whatever's in the trust is protected. And then the other big thing is that nursing home or Medicaid spend down, which could cost $8,000 to $12,000 per month. By taking your assets and now, so if this is you moving your assets inside of the trust, that builds in those protections. And then you are in control where you decide how these assets are invested. You can invest them however you want. And from a tax perspective, it ends up being tax neutral. Okay. So it's a way to build in protections from these things that some of my clients are concerned about. Someone's okay. So hopefully that's helpful. Getting back to Blue Cross Blue Shield, my experience, you have to enroll in Medicare Part A when you turn 65. Yeah, that's fine. There's no downside. Like you don't have to get, you don't have to get necessarily a Medicare card. You have to let Medicare know at the time, because you might have to get a letter from your, yeah. So they could try to enroll you in Medicare Part B depending on the situation. So that's where I'm saying if you're working, you don't have to enroll in Medicare Part B. They might try to penalize you, but as long as you're enrolled, or I'm sorry, as long as you're working, then you don't have to enroll in Medicare Part B and they can't penalize you. So yeah, they might ask you to prove it, but yeah, there is no penalty for not enrolling in Medicare if you're working. And the only penalty would be on the Medicare Part B side. Okay. All right, I'll get to that question shortly. Okay. So back to the Castle Trust. Okay, we'll get to that question. All right, good questions are coming in. I appreciate it. Number 4, and I'll get to them. I recently retired and then joined a new company. I had a HSA at the old company, and that's awesome. I am a big fan of HSAs because they grow tax-free. So anything that's in that tax-free bucket, I'm a fan of because most people think taxes are going up in the future. And you're maxing out the contribution. That's also awesome because you're maxing out the money you can put into a tax-free vehicle. The new company does not have a HSA, so that's kind of a bummer. Can I roll funds from my 401k into a HSA for future medical use? If this can be done, should I? I'm pretty sure you can't. And then even if you could, I would say no, you shouldn't. I think your idea, the strategy, your goal. So I always like to start with kind of goal, strategy, and then pick the tools. So it sounds like the goal is to get as tax-free as possible. So I am a huge fan of that goal right now because I think taxes are one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities out there. So the strategy is we have tax deferred dollars that we want to move to tax-free. Okay, that's awesome. Here's where we're kind of confusing some of the tools that we should use. And again, this is what we do. Like a lot of times people know what their goals are. Sometimes they become a little fuzzy on the strategies, but a lot of times they're missing on some of the tools. And this is one of the value adds that we have. Like, so I have a lot of engineering clients, and so the do-it-yourselfers, they always nail like the right goals just based on their research, and sometimes they hit the strategy, sometimes they don't, but a lot of times we're missing out on like what are the best tools to use. So big picture, we have these tax buckets, and I was meeting with a client today who's been on a bunch of our webinars, and once I started doing this, they're like, we can do it. I can draw these for you if you want. But we have our non-qualified accounts. So like we talked about, checking, savings, brokerage. We have our tax deferred accounts, like our IRAs, 401ks. And then we have our tax-free accounts, like our Roths, IUL, HSAs, and 529s, which grow, have to be used for education. So the goal here is to get as much as we can. And this is again, something we've been hitting the banging the drums on, get money out of these tax deferred accounts to either tax-free or non-qualified. Because again, if taxes go up, which most people think, then the value of this account drops dramatically. Because whenever you pull money out, it's taxed at whatever your ordinary income tax rates are. And we know these are going up in the future. That's the way the laws currently are. So the comment is he's been saving in the health savings account, and he's been contributing to that account. Okay. So anyone, depending on your insurance and whether you're working, you can contribute to a health savings account. You can contribute to a Roth. You can contribute to these different accounts. So contributions, and there's different rules around contributions, and there's some specific rules around Roth contributions where there's income tests. There's specific contribution rules around HSAs. There's no contribution rules for index universal life. But what he's talking about is more of moving money, or what we would call a conversion, where we're taking money from this bucket and now moving it over here. Okay. Well, you can't, at least I don't think, and even if you could, you wouldn't want to do it. You can't move money from a 401k or IRA to a HSA. You can't do like a health savings account conversion. Maybe you can, but you wouldn't want to, like, because the money is going to grow tax-free. And if it's in a HSA, for it to get tax-free growth, you have to use it for healthcare. But really what you would be looking at doing would be not you wouldn't be doing like a health savings account conversion. It sounds like more what you're trying to do is a Roth conversion. And really, when we have money in this tax deferred account and we want to get it over to the tax-free account, really we only have two options. And that's looking at Roth conversions or moving the money to index universal life or cash value life. Those are the only kind of conversion strategies. Or at the very least, just withhold the taxes and move it into a brokerage account. But we shouldn't be thinking about moving money from a 401k to an HSA. That wouldn't be the best way to do things. Now, you might want to explore, depending on whether your insurance allows it, an independent health savings account. So there are those out there. One of them is a company called Lively, where it's an independent health savings account not tied to a employer. But there's going to be certain rules around that, whether your insurance with your new employer allows you to even contribute. But we wouldn't look at doing like health savings contributions or conversions. So with that pre-tax dollars, I would be looking at things like Roth conversions, cash value life insurance, or just moving it to the non-qualified bucket. Because even the non-qualified bucket's better than the tax deferred. Like, this is the best money, second best money, third best money, given the taxes are going up in the future. So, all right, 4 down, a few more to go. And I have the questions that came in. I'll get to those as well. If a person's assets are in primarily qualified accounts, is it better to convert to non-qualified into a castle trust or purchase long-term care insurance with qualified funds? Can long-term care insurance be purchased with qualified funds? So here's that frustrating attorney fiduciary answer. It depends. It depends on what your goals are, how you have your assets situated. But those are two of the basic strategies as it relates to tax planning. So I guess if we're engaging in tax planning, typically we're going to want to move the money from the IRA. So we kind of have two strategies here. So one, and these aren't independent of each other. I have plenty of families that actually do both. So the first strategy is, like we talked about before, we set up that asset protection trust. Okay. And we move money into the trust. And then once we've made it 5 years, 100% of what we've moved into the trust is protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down. And Medicaid could run $8,000 to $12,000 per month for a nursing home. And by us moving money into that, and Medicaid only allows you to keep $2,000 as a single individual. So there's a $2,000 asset limit. So by us moving the money into the trust, we've made it 5 years. Now, what cannot go into that trust is IRA money. So you might have, just making up numbers, $1.5 million inside of an IRA. Well, we need to pay the tax, and there's different strategies on how to do this, and move it into the trust and invest it. And I have a lot of clients doing that because we know, based on current laws, the taxes are going up in 2025 because that's when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. Plus, we're approaching about $30 trillion in debt. Plus, right now, we're at the lowest tax bracket we've ever been in history. So where do you think income taxes are going in the future? Well, they're the lowest they've ever been in history. The law currently says they're going to go up, and we're $30 trillion in debt, which is the most amount of debt we've ever had. And I want to say it's probably doubled. And I'd have to double check this, but I would say it's doubled since probably 2016. I have to double check that, but I remember about 2015, 2016, I feel like we're at about $16 trillion in debt. And now we're at $30 trillion in debt. So just imagine what the interest is on that. So for all these reasons, most people think taxes have to go up. So that's why even if we're not doing a castle trust, a lot of people are engaging in this tax planning strategy of trying to minimize taxes. And this is something that we've been working with our clients for a while on. So that's one strategy. Now, another strategy with regards to just long-term care. So this is taking into account first tax planning, second estate planning, and then third long-term care planning. So it's kind of putting all these things together. And this is what I think our firm does a really good job of doing is putting together the legal plan, the financial plan, the tax plan, putting it all together in one unified plan. Because guess what? No offense to, let's say Edward Jones. Edward Jones is going to talk to you about a strategy like this, or Merrill Lynch, or any brokerage house. Like they literally can't talk to you about these types of strategies. So I have a lot of clients doing that. Now, another option, and this would be more of a tax planning. No, this would be less of a tax planning strategy. This would be more focusing kind of on long-term care strategy. Would be, okay, I have this IRA money, and let's say it's 1.5 million. I chip off 300,000. Okay. And then that 300,000, and I'm kind of oversimplifying things here, but that 300,000 now buys you a long-term care bucket of money of, let's call it $600,000 that could be used for long-term care or a death benefit. And this could be done inside of your IRA. And so this could be done inside of the IRA. Now, what happens is actually the taxes are paid over 10 years. But what it's doing is taking $300,000 pre-tax, turning that into $600,000 of long-term care benefits or death benefits. So it's a bucket of money where if you use, say, 200,000 of this for long-term care, that would leave a $400,000 death benefit to your kids. So I have a lot of clients who are doing both of these. Okay. So they're not liquidating the whole IRA, but they're leveraging it for a long-term care or death benefit. Plus, with this can pay for home care and assisted living, while the Castle Trust only protects against nursing home care. So if we're looking at that entire elder care journey of needing, needing home care and assisted living, well, this is now covered by that asset-based long-term care strategy. And then we never want to overinsure. And so if we're looking at nursing home costing maybe $14,000 a month these days, this is where the Castle Trust protects against that. Versus this might be 8,000, 5,000, 3,000. So if you really want to protect against the whole long-term care journey, then I would say one's not better than the other, but maybe you look at both, where you have that asset-based long-term care strategy to cover the first part if you were to need it. And then the second part would be covered and protected against the Castle Trust. Okay. So if long-term care is your concern, you might actually look at not one or the other, but you might look at both of them, depending on what your goals are. So, let me just, one new message. Can you further explain the paying over 10 years? Don't you have to pay all of the taxes on the conversion? No. So the way that this product works, or this tool works, is that 300,000, and it's a proprietary product with one company. And it's the only company I'm aware of that can do this within inside of the IRA. But yeah, so the taxes are paid over 10 years. So think of it as 30,000 a year is going to come out as a 1099. Okay. So that's going to show up. You're going to have $30,000 of income that's going to be a 1099. But immediately you're going to have, you're going to have these, the 600,000 death benefit and long-term care benefit. Okay. And all right. Number 6, when does trust? All right, let's answer this one. Are the medical qualifications for annuity with long-term care benefits less stringent than those with whole life or universal life? All right, so this brings up like a third long-term care strategy. So the question is with regards to the qualification. So let me, all right, so this is a sample client I was just kind of putting together. So this isn't personal information. So this is really getting at these three strategies. So with a long-term care plan, there's three strategies. So one is we can have a tool that creates income, say $30,000 a year. Okay, so it's an annuity. And I'm not for annuities. I'm not against annuities. I think they're just a tool. I think a lot of times they're overfunded or oversold because there's a lot of just annuity salesmen out there. But that said, they're a tool and they're a somewhat unique tool. So let's say that we have $30,000 a year of income. Well, there's certain annuities that have what's called a home healthcare doubler, which if you need home care, assisted living or nursing home care, then this then becomes, instead of $30,000, $60,000 a year once you need long-term care. Okay. And even if the annuity runs out of cash value, you would get this long-term care benefit. So the question is with regards to underwriting. So for this product or this tool, there is not any underwriting. The only thing is to trigger this long-term care benefit, you have to wait 2 years. Okay. So if you have a loved one that's you're caring for at home that's diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, or you just think in the future they might need home care or assisted living, there's a way to create or leverage the assets where we move money into it. We wait 2 years and then you can turn on income. And if they need long-term care, that income will double. So the underwriting for this is you just have to wait 2 years. And this is available even if you have a diagnosis. Okay. So it doesn't matter what your health is, you just can't already be in an assisted living. And you just have to wait 2 years from the time you trigger it. So that's the annuity with long-term care that someone asked. Then the whole life or universal life, that I'll call that the asset-based long-term care strategy. So yes, for this, there is underwriting. Okay. You have certain diagnosis like cancer within the last couple of years, dementia, you're using a walker that has 3 prongs versus 1 prong. You're on Social Security disability. You're not going to qualify for that asset-based long-term care strategy. You're not going to qualify for, you would not qualify for this because of underwriting. Okay. So you still have to be relatively healthy to qualify for that. Then the third option is the asset protection trust. And with this, there's no underwriting. Like I have plenty of clients who loved one already is diagnosed with something, not healthy. But the key is for Medicaid purposes, Medicaid has a 5-year look back period, meaning we move assets into the trust. And once we've made it 5 years, we can wave that checkered flag because 100% of what we have in that trust is protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down. So that's where, again, it's figuring out what your goals are. Okay, you're concerned about long-term care. Let's figure out what strategy makes the most sense, and then we pick the right tools. Okay, answered that. All right. All right. If you're working over the age of 65, can you contribute to your 401k as well as contribute to an IRA? what is the max you can contribute to each? If you went over, what are the ramifications? Yeah, so as long as you're working, you can contribute to either, even if you're over the age of 65. The amount you can contribute changes every year. And this is where I'm going to refer to my handy dandy key data for 2022 sheet. So we can contribute up to $20,500 moving forward in the 401ks, and then $6,000 to the IRAs with catch-up provisions of $1,000 if you're over the age of 70. Now, the big thing here to keep in mind, and this is what sometimes throws people off. So the answer to this is yes, you can. What is the max you can contribute? Changes every year. 401k is 20,000 and change. Traditional and Roth IRA is 6,000 and change, or 6,000 with a catch-up. And then the big thing to keep in mind is there is an income test. And this is where sometimes people are screwed up with regards to the deductible or Roth IRA. So for it to be deductible for your IRA or Roth, there's an income test. And if you go over the max, what happens? Then it becomes non-deductible. Basically, it's kind of like almost like a brokerage account in that sense. So you don't want to go over that amount. All right. Okay. A couple other questions. Let me answer these. All right. So, whoops. All right. So, Tom Hegna. So right now we have Tom Hegna. He's been on PBS and he has a couple interesting presentations. One is paychecks and paychecks, and then another one talking about retirement in 7 steps. And if you want information on that, just reply to the email and I'll send you the registration if you haven't registered. We have another presentation with him, I want to say Thursday at 6 p.m. and then next Wednesday at 7 p.m. He did an interesting presentation. However, I did not get a sense of the eternal rate of return of fixed index annuities these days. I suspect it would be 1 or 2% after commission, profits, administration costs, but how much more returns because of someone who aspire? What are the total returns on a fixed joint life annuity these days for someone approaching 70? So the question, and again, I don't like to get into tools too often, but the question is about fixed index annuities. Big picture, the key with this is this word index. The way it grows is like this. If the market goes down, you don't lose anything. If the market goes up, you collect the upside of the market. And I would say there's 2 main types of fixed index annuities. One is income, one that are geared towards, you're going to flip it on and turn it on as an income, fixed income source for the rest of your life. And the second is growth. Okay. And a lot of times, especially with our wealthier clients, we're looking at growth annuities as a bond replacement. Income annuities, typically you're looking at a 2% to maybe 3% rate of return on your cash value. So if you're to just cash it out, with regards to the income side of things, you're probably looking at a 5 to 7% rate of return. And we don't do a lot of income annuities, to be honest. But growth annuities, you're probably looking at a 5 to 7% rate of return on these. And there's no, the trade-off is that you're not going to take all the money out within a year or two. But you're looking at a 5 to 6% rate of return on average, or 5 to 7% rate of return on average, and you have downside protection. So a lot of times people are looking at growth annuities as a bond alternative. And as long as you follow the rules of the annuity, like there's no fees or anything that you have to worry about. So I can very easily show you the internal rate of return on a fixed index annuity. But a lot of times we're doing growth annuities just because our clients have a little bit more money versus the guaranteed income annuities. And we're not doing any variable annuities. Variable annuities, that's where you get caught up in like fees and you have insurance fees and then your expense ratios. Like a variable annuity would have, I would say on average, a 2.25% fee on that, versus like a growth fixed index annuity would be 0%. So a lot of people are looking at the growth fixed index annuity as a bond replacement, because right now, like people always talk about this like 60-40 investment of like equities. This has always been like the holy grail of bonds. But I tell you what, like bonds have been so underperforming, and what they found is there's studies to show that there's not the inverse correlation that people have always thought, where if equities go down, bonds are going to go up. So like I can take almost any portfolio, and if we move this 40%, say, to a FIA that's geared towards growth, it's going to outperform any bond portfolio typically. Plus, there's no fees on it too, so you don't have that fee erosion or expense ratios that erode any market portfolio. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying that these are tools, depending on what your goals are. You might want. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Thank you. Gosh darn it! I hate when I do that. Geez. Thanks for keeping me honest. All right. Thanks for paying attention. I was just testing it. All right. Okay. So I'm sorry. So just kind of summarizing, with fixed index annuities, you have two types of fixed index annuities. You have income annuities where the actual growth of the account is pretty limited. It's like 2 to 3%. You're certainly not knocking it out of the park. But if you were to flip on the annuity switch, typically the income, which is going to be a separate column, might be growing at 5 to 7%. So if you flip on the income switch, then okay, that's great. That keeps up with the market. If you don't, then it's going to be underperforming. So we have not done a lot, and depending on situation, just with most of our clients, income annuities don't make a lot of sense. But that's what I see sold a lot of times, unfortunately. And especially with the variable annuities, I'm not a big fan of those at all. Where I see more of a use right now is on these growth annuities. That you're probably looking at an internal rate of return of anywhere to 5 to 7%, because there's no fees associated with them. There's no costs, and it's geared towards growth, and it makes a good bond alternative, where if the market goes down, you don't lose anything. If the market goes up, you're going to collect the upside of the market. And again, with bonds so underperforming, if I'm looking at just putting together a portfolio for longevity to make your money last as long as possible, we shift a portion of your bonds, which are underperforming, to fixed index annuities that are geared towards growth, that get maybe 5 to 7%. And over the last 20 years, we've seen anywhere from 0 to 22% or 20% per year growth. That's pretty good for something that's guaranteed not to go down. So I see more of a use for the growth annuities than the income annuities for a majority of our clients these days. And that was just with regards to presentation Tom Pegna did last night. We're going to redo it Thursday, and then we're going to do it again next Wednesday, not this week, next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. He's been on PBS. He's written a couple books, really interesting, kind of exciting presenter. So if you get tired of me presenting, you can listen to Tom. All right, another question on Tom. Tom also touted life insurance with long-term care. Would IUL, same Florence, from this, how much would your insurance, is there full transparency from how much pay? So Tom also talked about what I just talked about right here, kind of looking at like combination of long-term care and life insurance. Typically you're going to see a 5 to 7% rate of return. They're kind of complicated, so they're certainly not for everyone. They take quite a while to set up because there is like full underwriting on it. And this is specifically with IUL. But yeah, you're looking at typically an average rate of return of anywhere from 5 to 7%. I would say on average. like I have a policy, this last statement, I got 7.8% rate of return. So, yep. Okay, that's that question. We can't see what you're writing. Now you can. If you're drawing, we can't see it. Now you can. All right. Okay, any more questions, put them in. Otherwise, I do have another question that was submitted. And this is the last one I have. And hopefully you can see what I'm writing now. Can you see my screen? Someone can just put in the chat, yes. Yes, perfect, thank you. All right. All right, here, and now I'm gonna turn it off, so now you just see my face. When one spouse dies, should the surviving spouse combine trusts or keep them separate? What is the advantage of kept separate? All right. Kind of depends. Again, I'm sorry. But I would say these days, a lot of times we're doing, so the question is like a joint trust where we have two, say a husband and wife, and they have one joint trust. This is the way typically we do it these days. In the past, especially when estate taxes were so much lower, we would have, each spouse would have their own trust. I actually had clients come in today because they had a estate plan done in, I think it was 1996, and they had these separate trusts. Here's the problem. One spouse passes away, whoops. One spouse passes away, then what happens is that this trust locks down. And so now the surviving spouse has to not only manage like their affairs, but also the separate trust. Why we might do the separate trust would be maybe second marriage situations where we want to make sure that this money like goes to like the kids from the first marriage once that surviving spouse passes away. Or the big reason we did them in the past was estate taxes. State taxes used to be, if you had more than 600,000, you had estate tax issues. Now that number has grown to 12 million for a single individual, or 24 million for a married couple. So we're not doing a lot of separate trusts. And the reason why is it's just more complicated. It's more complicated when one spouse passes away versus with the joint trust, one spouse passes away, survivor's still maintaining things. They don't have to administer a separate trust or worry about separate tax IDs or anything like that. So while you might want to keep the separate trust if it was like a second marriage and you want to make sure the money goes back to kids from the first marriage or something like that. But otherwise, I'm a big fan of simplicity. I would rather try to keep things as simple as possible unless there's a reason to add on that complexity. Like what we do is complex enough. We don't need to add on to the complexity. So I typically recommend the joint trust for a married couple, unless there's a reason why not to. I had, like I said, clients come in this morning. They had separate trusts from 96. They wanted to build in protections for their kids. So whatever their kids inherit are protected from divorces, creditors, bankruptcies. And we wanted to make sure that it's easy as possible on that surviving spouse. It was one of those kind of classic situations where we had one spouse that handled all the finances and did everything, and they were the slightly older spouse. And so the thought is, if that older spouse passes away that handles everything, we want to make things as simple and easy as possible on that surviving spouse. So as we're updating the trust, we could have kept the separate trust structure, but we decided to simplify things. So again, I think a lot of the stuff is complex on its own. We don't want to add on additional complexities. This question applies to children of deceased spouse from second marriage. A new spouse wants to combine. Well, yeah, so that's why we might want to have those separate trusts, because when one spouse passes away, if we have those separate trusts, like when we used to do workshops, we had, let's say we have husband and wife, right? Husband or wife passes away, everything goes to husband. Husband mourns for a month, meets someone new, falls in love, gets married. Now husband passes away. Where might those assets go? To the new spouse versus going down to the kids. So by having separate trusts, when one spouse passes away, now maybe depending on how the trusts are set up, the surviving spouse can access the funds for his or her own needs. But when that surviving spouse passes away, now the money doesn't go to that new spouse, maybe Biff the pool boy, but goes down to the kids or the kids from the previous marriage. So the follow-up question was, this question applies to children of deceased from second marriage, and new spouse wants to combine. Yeah, that might be a reason why you would want to keep those separate trusts, is because you want to make sure that those children from the previous marriage or the second marriage are taken care of. If you have that joint trust, depending on how it's set up, when one spouse passes away, that surviving spouse could revoke the whole thing and leave everything to their kids. And I've seen it happen. I remember early in my practice, I was counseling a husband and wife. They actually didn't have any children, but they wanted half the money to go to his side, half the money to go to her. And I was talking to them about this very issue of, do you want a joint trust or do you want separate trust? Separate trust will lock in what your wishes are when one spouse passes away, versus a joint trust, it doesn't really become irrevocable until both of you pass away. So what happened was one spouse passed away, everything went to surviving spouse got older, surviving spouse had just her family taking care of her as her caregivers. She didn't have contact with the other spouse's, deceased spouse's family. And then someone got in her ear and had her change her trust to leave everything now to her family. And now the niece from the husband side is reaching out and saying, hey, what happened there? So yeah, that might be a reason why to keep the separate trust, would be if it's like a second marriage situation. Let's see, another question. I have to just wrap up here. Can Castle Trust assets are protected from Medicaid? Are qualified assets also protected? No. So qualified assets by nature, they have to be in your name. So if it's a qualified account like a 401k, IRA, 457, a Roth, they have to be in your name. That's just the way it works. And especially with those pre-tax accounts, you have a silent partner who becomes not so silent, and that's the IRS. And so until you get the IRS, get rid of them as a partner, you don't have full control of that account. So you'd have to pay the taxes, move the money into the trust. So that's why, like I said, from a tax planning standpoint, I have a lot of my clients where we're having a tax planning strategy. So we pay the taxes, so we get the IRS out of our pockets. Now any growth, the IRS isn't part of, and now we can invest inside of the Castle Trust and invest it however we want. So no, IRAs, 401ks are not asset protected. And for Medicaid purposes, they're countable assets. So we have a client right now, husband and wife's going into a nursing home, and they have qualified funds, and we're working on strategies to pay those taxes and try to protect them. So no, qualified accounts are not protected from Medicaid or that nursing home spent down. All right. Any other questions? Last questions. All right. If not, I hope to see everyone next week. Feel free to invite a friend. As a reminder, we do have that special guest presenter, Tom Hegna. He's been seen on PBS. I think he's second to maybe only Ed Slott for number of appearances on PBS in the kind of financial and tax planning side of things. So I'm excited to bring him on for those webinars. They're going to be Thursday at 6 o'clock and then Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Feel free to shoot me an email, just reply, and I can send you the registration for that email. There won't be replays, so you do have to watch it at that time. So Happy New Year. Thanks, Gary. Thank you for all the questions. Make it a great week. Take care. Thank you.